Hello friends, and welcome back to Shelley Skylines, BrizVegas. It's good to have you here. In today's episode, we're picking up where we left off and focusing on expanding out the inner north. Specifically, we're looking at Spring Hill in the northern CBD of Brisbane. Spring Hill is one of the oldest suburbs in Brisbane. It has quite a bit of history, and of course some interest in the landscape as the name suggests. But before we get into the build, let's take a bit of a closer look at the history of the area. Over to you, Shelley, in the studio. So Spring Hill is considered a bit of an extension of the CBD and is one of the oldest residential neighbourhoods in Brisbane, with many houses dating from the 19th century. Some of the earliest land purchases around Brisbane were made in this area, as it was just north of the main settlement of the Brisbane town, with subdivisions and land sales beginning in 1856. However, in recent decades, much of the older residential and commercial structures have been demolished to be replaced by modern office blocks and apartment buildings. Still, there are a number of heritage-listed sites in the suburb that remain there to this day, including the Brisbane Grammar School buildings, which were established in 1869, the Spring Hill Baths, which were established in 1886, and a bit of a landmark there with the old windmill, as it's called, which is actually the oldest convict-built structure still surviving in Queensland. The windmill tower has accommodated a range of uses. Originally constructed in 1828 to process the wheat and corn crops of the Moreton Bay penal settlement, it had a treadmill attached for times when there was no wind, but also a tool for punishing convicts. Speaking of convicts and colonisation, when delving into the history of some of these areas, I think it cannot go unsaid that Australia's history overall is marked by the colonisation that brought significant suffering and injustice to Indigenous peoples. I was appalled to learn that Boundary Street in Spring Hill and also in West End were actually named due to the policy of preventing the traditional owners, the Jagera and the Turrbal peoples, from being within the boundaries of the British settlement at night time, which is frankly quite disgusting. So we won't shy away from discussing such aspects as we move throughout this city build. But some of the other notable streets in the area are Wickham Terrace, which is one of the most historic streets of Brisbane, and also St Paul's Terrace, which runs right through the centre, hugging along the north of the CBD there. St Paul's Terrace was named after one of the notable landmarks in the area, the St Paul's Presbyterian Church, which was originally constructed between 1887 and 1889. Something I didn't know is that Spring Hill was originally called Spring Hollow, and the name Spring Hill came into use when prominent citizens began living on the ridge, attracted by all the elevated thoroughfares which made for a desirable address. There's a bit of a theme with this as well in this area. So like most cities, there's a bit of a connection to the surrounding facilities or landmarks, basically lending their names to some of the streets and surrounds. So another good example is, as I mentioned in the last video, I'm a previous resident of Spring Hill, and the actual street I used to live on was named Quarry Street. And when reminding myself of some of this history, I found a few sites and a blog called "We Built This City on Rocks and Holes." Very amusing, talking all about the quarry which used to be in the middle of Spring Hill. It's a good way to describe Brisbane, I think, and this area in particular, as there was a large quarry on Quarry Street, obviously, and that supplied much of the stone used in many of Spring Hill's late 19th century developments, and evidence of that still exists in this little area to this day. On the entertainment side, there's a number of watering holes and restaurants and the like. A notable one being the Sportsman Hotel, or Sporties as it's known. So the Sportsman Hotel was originally built on this site in 1866, and it was called the Sir John Young Hotel, which was named after a governor of New South Wales. And this is another theme to how a lot of things in Australia are named, very much so after the first sort of politicians or whatnot. But sometime between 1960 and 1964, the site went through a bit of rebranding, and unfortunately the original building pictured here was demolished. And as the Q News article I read on the story of this place described it, the current erection rose like a phoenix from the rubble. I suspect this wording was adopted as the now current owner, who took over in 1989, a person by the name of Neil McLucas, a prominent person in the Brisbane gay community. He has essentially taken this site and evolved it into one of the main gay bars in the city, where at night it was transformed into one of Brisbane's first gay discos and still remains very popular to this day. In terms of the aesthetic of the residential around here, so these days it's obviously a big mix of old and new, but you may have heard the term Queenslander before, which is basically a style of house and allegedly considered one of Australia's, or if not the most iconic architectural style in Australia. So the quintessential Queenslander is a single detached house made of timber with a corrugated iron roof, as you can see, a good example of a Spring Hill Queenslander style house here. Queenslanders all have this underfloor area that is used to cool the building through ventilation because it is extremely warm and humid in Queensland, but it's also for protection of the main structure from things like termites and whatnot. Now, I actually thought that the whole concept of these stilts was primarily actually to protect from flooding, which is something that still hugely impacts Brisbane, but there you go, I learned something new. And we'll touch on some of the flooding aspects as we move through this video and this series, as it's another very large part of Brisbane's history. But anyway, I can't see myself achieving this Queenslander style in the game due to what's available, but still a very important part to the overall aesthetic and history of this suburb. So, enough history. My approach to starting out this build today is very much beginning with terraforming. So, as you may have guessed, the topography of Spring Hill is obviously a bit more dimensional than what I have here now, but still a nice blank canvas to start from. So given I'm a complete amateur at all of this, speaking of the floods, the way that I am approaching the terraforming is basically to start with this really basic map that I found that uses the floodplains to easily show me where there's highs and lows in the landscape. So I think by using this map, what I'm going to do is try and just get a little bit of elevation here where you see it's sort of showcased here on the flood map, and maybe we'll give that a go first and see how this approach works. Let's give it a go. So the main roads, like we talked about in the recap, we've got Boundary Street cutting right through the middle of Spring Hill. We've got St. Paul's Terrace coming off that, going up that way. And then Gregory Terrace goes all the way along, essentially bordering the suburb up the back here. And then on the back of Gregory Terrace is a bunch of parklands, which does then sort of dovetail down into the Roma Street parklands, which is what you're seeing here. Something I'm loving about doing this build is when I actually have you know, half-started little areas here and there, and then when I go to join them up, and it actually kind of fits. Not perfect, obviously, but yeah, okay, so I think that's a pretty good space, and I think I can see Boundary Street probably will start from here. Obviously the sort of interchanges here going up this way aren't exactly like the map, but you know, I think it'll do for now. So Boundary Street probably starts here and goes all the way across, and I guess essentially this is kind of like where Gregory Terrace is already set up to be. Something that is kind of irritating when you're trying to name things after the proper names, the roads just connect like this, and it means that you can't rename this portion of the road up here. I did see a little tip actually on City Planner Plays, which is one of my favorite City Skylines content channels, and they suggested to add a little bit of a sort of a tail, if you like, to the road, and sometimes that allows you to give these different names. So let me just see if I can do that real quick, because I think it's such a notable part of the city that I would love to be able to name it what it's actually called. And I think that's done it. So we've got Fawn Street here now, which we can rename to Gregory Terrace, just so we know where we are and get some of our bearings here. So we've got Gregory Terrace going, and that's gonna go brrr. So let's just draw that in now. How big is this road? It is one of the main roads that kind of takes you around the perimeter of Spring Hill and up into some of the other northern suburbs, so I think keeping it this size probably makes sense. So let's do that and turn on the windy doodah and draw in Gregory Terrace. So Boundary Street runs right across here, so that's a bit of an easy one. So let's chuck that in as well, and I think, again, keeping it to the 6-lane road is probably fine, especially when I'm likely going to put some trams in here. So let's just see. Now I might need to turn on this for this purpose. And obviously it is a hilly place, so, you know, I'm not really... But I think the least that we could do is probably level out where we're going to put the road. Because I think the way the game may draw this in is it's likely to sort of have a lot of bumps and whatnot, and that is not realism, so... I'm kind of thinking I might need to move this, and it's not really here in reality. So let me have a look at that first, actually. And you know, Gregory Terrace is where a lot of the medical clinics, a lot of the medical specialists and the like, they're often, yeah, so they're definitely concentrated on Gregory Terrace. So I think what we'll do is level Boundary Street as it starts to go up into the hills. Just to make sure that Boundary Street at least has a nice flat road. And you know what, actually? There is, in fact, a hospital on the south part of Boundary Street. So what I might do is actually move this here. So that would be the St. Andrew's War Memorial Hospital. Maybe we should just rename it while we're here. Yeah. Let's just rename that as well. Okay, and then the next main road is St. Paul's Terrace, which comes off Boundary Street and essentially goes in this direction. So this might be a good chance to just join it up to this roundabout here. Now, it is worth mentioning that this roundabout is not necessarily realistic, but it'll do for now. So let's go for St. Paul's Terrace. I think again, let's just actually maybe we'll make this one more of the 2-lane road, because we have all these main roads going around, and if memory serves me right, St. Paul's Terrace is just a 4-lane road. So I think Boundary Street, it's about in the middle of Boundary Street here. And again, this is not built to scale by any means, so we're just going for the vibe. And I think that looks pretty good. So St. Paul's Terrace does then carry on through the valley as well. And I think the location of the Story Bridge there, you know, I think there is a little bit of perhaps too much room maybe down this middle part between the valley and where Spring Hill would technically meet, but I think I can live with it. So the next street I want to look at is Wickham Terrace. So Wickham Terrace is kind of running along the bottom here, and I think given we've just moved all the schools around, what we can do is grab the tail of this and maybe loop that around up to Boundary Street. It goes around the hospital, yeah, and then up to there. So let's just get rid of some of this stuff here. Okay, so now what that gives us is Wickham Terrace, and then it becomes Leichhardt Street around here. I'm actually thinking there is a school. I forgot to rename this. There is a school on St. Paul's Terrace. So what I might do is move this up to St. Paul's Terrace. Just gives us a bit more room to bring this around and up here. We've got Wickham Terrace here, and we'll call this Leichhardt Street. Something that I've just done is screwed up the trams. Oh no, not the Unicity Loop. Okay, and then the other big street that is kind of running along parallel to St. Paul's Terrace is Water Street. So Water Street kind of comes out here and then goes all the way up, also connecting with this same main road up here. So let's draw in Water Street, and I think I'll keep this one to the 4-lane road as well. It's not exactly to scale, is it? But, yeah, it's close enough. Something else that I probably could have looked at in the last video is just there's too many people waiting for hearses around here. I feel like this is because of the traffic as well, though, which is still not really improving after the last episode. But anyway, we're getting distracted. So, let's start drawing in some of the smaller streets now that kind of connect between these main parts of Spring Hill. Again, very much taking artistic liberties and town planner decisions while I do this. And so next to the school is where Corrie Street used to be, actually. So I'm running out of a little bit of room for this. Let me just quickly move the school temporarily. Because I definitely want to have Quarry Street in here. And in fact, I'll just quickly rename that just so I don't forget. So we're obviously going to have to ignore a couple of streets that technically sort of sit in this area, but that's fine. Score goes there. Quarry Street is here. I'm actually really tempted to put a quarry on Quarry Street because I thought something that could be quite entertaining while we take a deep dive in the history of these areas is potentially to develop them in a similar kind of fashion, even though it wouldn't necessarily be like that in modern times. I think a little quarry here might be good because I also need to increase my production. I am not really producing much right now, so I think I'm gonna just add in a little stone mining on Quarry Street while we're here. Yeah, and I think what would be fun is, you know, coming back and perhaps replacing this with some apartments in the future, just to get some of that realism going on. All right, so we know that is Quarry Street for sure. Let's keep drawing in some more of these little streets. So we've got our little quarry, we've got our school, we've got a nice little spaghetti of random inner city streets. I think I probably just need a couple more up here. So I'll just finish that off and then we'll get to doing some zoning. Okay, look, I don't think this is perfect, but I think it'll do for now. So I think what I'm going to do is, because there is a big quarry here now, technically there was a big playground here kind of near the school as well, so I might just start first by putting in some of these parks, so I know what I'm working with. Love it. Okay, you're starting to see some of the actual, something I wouldn't normally like. I think in this area in particular though, as you saw with my old apartment, like they were kind of really built in and around the rocks, kind of making it work, you know? So I think I normally wouldn't like that, but it does give me the essence of what this street used to look like. So I guess the other thing that's unfortunate while we're looking at St. Paul's Terrace is we obviously don't have any kind of church asset, but I've been saving the medieval castle for something. In the absence of a church, it looks kind of churchy, but it's also just way too huge. Okay, we'll come back to that. Now, what other parks do we have around here? According to the map, this is the only real kind of park. So I think we're good with that, but in the history video, we did talk about some of the other assets in the area. Besides the state school, we also have the grammar school, which is kind of over here on Gregory Terrace. So I wonder if that's a good place to replop our little high school that we've temporarily moved over here. I mean, they wouldn't have an American football field, but oh, that's right, I put the hospital there. Oh, that's right, I put this. Let's just put you on the other side. Maybe down there. Okay. Now let's move this. And I think this was one of the first high schools. Well, for a while there, it was my only high school. So it's kind of, you know, historical. It looks like a grammar school. It's actually quite a large school, isn't it? Okay. Now what we could do to solve this problem I'm going to have with putting things on this windy road, I think I'm going to try and use pedestrian paths in this situation. Because we do already have... Yeah, so I think what I'm going to do is use pedestrian paths for this. Because we also have that tying into our whole concept of this little area here joining up with Roma Street Parklands, so... So that's the grammar school. So I obviously don't have a windmill either, and I don't think I have a good alternative for it, honestly. Yeah, and I was also having a scan through the houses to see if anything looked kind of Queenslandery. But it doesn't. I've also placed all of these already. Anyway, so let's just focus on some zoning to see how this kind of fills out around here. And we'll look at some pictures of the skyline that I found, and just kind of refer to those and see if we can get a bit of the heights and stuff to look a little bit similar, at least from down here. Okay, so looking at this photo in particular, so you can see the river snaking around there, and then along the bottom is Gregory Terrace, and some of that parkland peeking through that I mentioned. And so along here, it's actually quite bare besides what's going on with the school in the bottom corner. And then it's kind of a little bit flat around here before it kind of feathers into the more medium and then obviously into the quite large density in the CBD. So I think this is a pretty good picture to base things from. And I think even though we took some creative license here, the bones, I guess, of these roads here actually look pretty good. So let's start some zoning. So I don't think technically these would be low density, but I think we'll start with that. And what you'll notice I'm doing is I'm kind of doing a bit of a crisscross where I place this, because what I like to do is just toggle the building style. So even though none of this really looks Australian, I think it still at least helps give a bit of variety in the buildings as they pop up. So that's the approach I normally take, just to make sure there's not too much duplication with the assets. And so we talked about the Sportsman Hotel. The Sportsman Hotel is down here. I think the mixed density is probably going to give us a little bit of a vibe of sporties. So let's put some of that there. And of course, my old apartment. So I think the medium density is probably as good as it's going to get for getting anything that looks remotely like that. Okay, well that's everything zoned. I obviously don't have a lot of demand yet for some of these things, but actually while we're waiting, I thought the water could be good as the Spring Hill Baths. So it's located here near the corner of Boundary Street and Gregory Terrace. So a good little spot for that, maybe up here. That's great. That might actually encourage a little bit more of the residential to grow. Because the other thing we can do while we're waiting is just extend the trams out into these roads now. As I mentioned in the last video, there were trams in Brisbane in like the 50s. I'm pretty sure they ran all the way up here and all the way down here. When I was doing some research for my upcoming videos, which is sort of extending a bit more out into this part of town, apparently a lot of the trams stopped running due to a great tram fire that happened in the mid-60s, and it essentially led to these kind of suburbs around here abandoning the tram lines after they've been running for several decades, and basically led to them subsequently making the transition to buses. So we'll learn more about that in the next episode, but I think I'm definitely enjoying keeping the trams around and having a bit of a nod back to some of Brisbane's history for that reason as well. So now that we've got the tram line in the road, we can add a few more stops. So I think Yes, and I've screwed up the trains while I'm working here, but that's fine. Surely I think it would have run right along Boundary Street. We'll have some out the front of the old school. And maybe a bit further up the hill here. Oh. And I think we're already repeating the same mistakes. Okay, well, I think that's enough for today's episode. So we've done a deep dive of the history of Spring Hill, and we've used that to inform some of the things that we've done here. So we've done a loose interpretation of the road network with St. Paul's Terrace, Gregory Terrace, one of the oldest streets in Brisbane. We've been able to plop some of these landmarks as well, like the Spring Hill Baths, the Brisbane Grammar School. We've taken the liberty of putting a little quarry here as a nod back to Spring Hill's history. And I look forward to seeing how this little area fills out and adds to the skyline we have going on here in BrizVegas. So I think in the next episode we'll just take a bit of an update as this area fills out, but I'm very keen to also do a little bit more out into this west area and just really start to build out this part of town. There's some really fascinating history in these areas as some of the oldest parts of Brisbane, and I'm very much looking forward into diving into that with you. So thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Okay, thanks, bye.